Before we begin, subscribe, like, comment which story gave you chills, and share this with someone who loves exploring the unknown. Story 1: The Waverly Hills Sanatorium. In the fall of 2018, a group of 4 paranormal investigators, Michael, his girlfriend Lisa, and their friends Derek and Amanda, decided to spend the night in one of America's most notoriously haunted locations, the abandoned Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. Built in 1910 to house tuberculosis patients during the White Plague epidemic, Waverly Hills had a dark history. Over the decades it operated,
hand me the monitor.
An estimated 63,000 people died within
Lights
its
are on.
walls.
We're set.
Perfect.
The disease was so contagious and so deadly that bodies were transported through a secret underground tunnel, the body chute, to avoid demoralizing the living patients who watched funeral after funeral from their windows. The building had been closed since 1961, left to decay for decades. Its 5 stories of crumbling corridors, peeling paint, and shattered windows made it a magnet for urban explorers and ghost hunters. Michael's group had obtained official permission for their overnight investigation. They arrived just before sunset, their van loaded with cameras, EMF detectors, voice recorders, and enough batteries to last through the night. The massive Gothic Revival building loomed before them, its empty windows like dark eyes watching their approach. "This place is massive," Amanda said, staring up at the structure. "We need to stick together." They entered through the main doors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. Graffiti covered the walls, left by countless trespassers over the years. Their footsteps echoed through empty hallways that had once been filled with the sounds of dying patients. They started on the first floor, documenting everything with their cameras. The hospital beds were long gone, but remnants remained: rusted medical equipment, broken wheelchairs, old patient files scattered across the floor. Lisa picked up one of the files, the paper brittle with age. "Mary Thompson, age 24, admitted March 1945. She read aloud. "Died June 1945. 3 months, Derek said quietly. "That's all she lasted." They moved through the building methodically, floor by floor. The second floor housed the children's ward, where young tuberculosis patients had been isolated from their families. Amanda found a room with child-sized beds still bolted to the floor, and teddy bears left by modern visitors as memorials. By midnight they'd reached the 4th floor, the most notorious area of the hospital. This was where the most severe cases were kept, where the death rate had been highest. The hallways stretched into darkness, longer than it should be, doors lining both sides like tombstones. "I'm getting major EMF spikes here," Michael said, watching his detector flash rapidly. "Something's active." They walked down the hallway, checking rooms one by one. Most were empty shells with collapsed ceilings and vegetation growing through the floors. But then they reached room 502. Room 502 had a reputation. According to legend, a nurse had hanged herself there in 1928 after discovering she was pregnant and unmarried, a scandal that would have destroyed her career and life. Years later, another nurse allegedly jumped from the room's window to her death. The door to room 502 stood partially open. Unlike the other rooms, this one felt different. The temperature dropped noticeably, their breath visible in the flashlight beams. The EMF detector went crazy, the needle maxing out. "Is anyone here?" Lisa called out, her voice recorder running. "Can you give us a sign?" For a moment, nothing. Then they heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from inside the room. Something being dragged across the floor. They all froze, flashlights trained on the doorway. The scraping continued,
Still no
slow
signal?
and
Nothing.
deliberate.
We're cut off. A door!
Then it stopped.
Let's check it.
"Hello?"
Stay close.
Michael called. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to communicate." The temperature dropped further. Derek's thermometer read 42 degrees, impossibly cold for a sealed room. Then the door to room 502 slammed shut with tremendous force, the bang echoing through the entire floor. Amanda screamed. They all jumped back. Michael reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked, though there was no lock mechanism. The hospital had removed all locks decades ago. "We need to leave," Lisa said, her voice shaking. Right now. But as they turned to head back down the hallway, they saw something that made their blood freeze. At the far end of the corridor, barely visible in the darkness, was a figure. A woman in a nurse's uniform, standing perfectly still, watching them. "Who's there?" Derek shouted, but his voice cracked with fear. The figure didn't respond. Didn't move. Just stood there, a dark silhouette against the faint moonlight coming through the windows. Michael raised his camera and turned on the night vision. Through the green-tinted screen, they could see her more clearly. The nurse's uniform was old-fashioned, from the 1920s. Her face was pale, almost translucent. And most disturbing of all, she was floating 6 inches above the floor. "Oh my God!" Michael whispered. The figure began to move toward them, gliding down the hallway without walking. No footsteps. No sound except their own panicked breathing. They ran. Down the hallway, toward the stairwell, their flashlights bouncing wildly. Behind them, they could hear something following. Not footsteps, but a rustling sound, like fabric dragging across the floor. And underneath it, a soft humming. A lullaby. They burst through the stairwell door and took the stairs 3 at a time, desperate to reach the ground floor. But when they reached the 3rd floor landing, they stopped abruptly. The stairs going down were gone. Not collapsed, gone. Where there should have been concrete steps, there was only darkness. An impossible void. "That's not possible," Derek said. "We just came up these stairs." Above them, the stairwell door they'd come through opened slowly. The humming grew louder. "Go up," Lisa urged. "We'll find another way down." They climbed to the 5th floor, the top of the building. The stairwell door opened onto a long corridor lined with rooms that had once been the hospital's surgery ward. The ceiling here had partially collapsed, moonlight streaming through holes in the roof. They tried every stairwell on the 5th floor, but each one was the same. The stairs below the 5th floor had simply vanished, replaced by that inexplicable darkness. "We're trapped," Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. Michael pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. None of them had signal, though they'd all had full bars when they entered the building. "There has to be another way," Michael said, trying to stay calm. "The body chute. The tunnel they used to transport bodies. It connects to the outside." They'd seen it on their research. The tunnel entrance was on the 1st floor, but there was a service chute that connected all floors, used to send supplies and equipment between levels. If they could find it, they could climb down to the 1st floor and escape through the tunnel. They searched frantically, checking every room, until Derek found it, a narrow shaft behind a rusted metal door, with metal rungs forming a ladder down into darkness. "I'll go first," Michael said, shining his flashlight into the shaft. It descended into blackness, the bottom not visible. "Follow me close." He started climbing down, the metal rungs cold and slippery under his hands. The others followed, one by one, descending into the shaft single file. The space was barely wide enough for their bodies, the walls pressing in on both sides. They'd gone down about 2 floors when Michael's flashlight illuminated something that made him stop. Carved into the metal wall of the shaft, in dozens of different handwritings, were messages. "Help US. They won't let US leave. Been here for days. The nurses won't stop following." And then, most chilling of all, "If you're reading this, you're already dead. Keep moving," Lisa urged from above. "Don't stop." Michael continued down, trying to ignore the messages, but they kept appearing. Hundreds of them, carved or scratched into every available surface. Dates ranging from the 1920s to just weeks ago. Finally, his feet hit solid ground. He'd reached the 1st floor. The others climbed down behind him, all of them shaking and exhausted. They were in a narrow corridor, covered in grime and debris. At the end, they could see a door marked, "Morgue access, body chute." They ran for it, no longer caring about investigation or evidence. They just wanted out. The door opened onto a tunnel, the infamous body chute, sloping downward toward the outside world. The walls were stained and crumbling, the air thick with the smell of decay. But at the far end, perhaps 200 feet away, they could see moonlight. The exit. They started down the tunnel, half running, half sliding on the sloped floor. They were halfway to freedom when the lights appeared. Hospital gurney wheels, glowing with a pale blue light, materialized throughout the tunnel. Dozens of them, arranged in rows as if transporting invisible bodies. And pushing them were translucent figures in old medical attire, orderlies and nurses from decades past, going through the motions of their eternal duty, transporting the dead to the outside world. The group pressed themselves against the tunnel walls as the spectral procession passed. The ghostly figures paid them no attention, focused on their endless task. Michael counted them as they passed, 30, 40, 50 gurneys, all empty, all glowing with that eerie blue light. When the last gurney passed, they ran. They didn't look back, didn't slow down until they burst out of the tunnel exit and into the cool night air outside the hospital. They collapsed on the grass, gasping and crying with relief. When they finally looked back at the building, they saw faces in every window on the 4th floor. Dozens of them, patients and staff, all watching them leave. And in one window, room 502, stood the nurse, still and silent, her translucent hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave goodbye. They left their equipment behind, got in their van, and drove away.
Which way? They all look the
footage
same!
From their cameras
The
showed
map is
nothing,
useless! We're going in
just static
circles!
and darkness.
Everyone stay
after
together!
They reached the 4th floor. Their voice recorders captured only their own voices, and underneath, that soft humming lullaby playing on endless repeat. Michael's group never returned to Waverly Hills. They don't do paranormal investigations anymore. Because they learned something that night that changed them forever. Some places don't let you investigate them. Some places investigate you. And some places never let you truly leave, even when you escape. Even now, 3 years later, they all hear it sometimes in their dreams. That soft humming. That lullaby from room 502. And they wake up in cold sweats, checking their surroundings, making sure they really made it out. Because sometimes, late at night, they're not entirely sure they did. Story 2, The Penhurst Asylum. Our second story takes place in Spring City, Pennsylvania, at the ruins of Penhurst State School and Hospital, an institution with one of the darkest histories in American mental health care. In October 2019, photography student Jessica Chen, 23, convinced 3 of her classmates to join her for an overnight photo essay project documenting the abandoned asylum. Penhurst had been closed since 1987 after decades of abuse and neglect were exposed. The patients, many of whom had been children with developmental disabilities, had suffered unimaginable cruelty within those walls. Jessica had obtained permission from the Historical Society that now owned the property, on the condition that they stay in the main administration building and not enter the more dangerous structures. She agreed, though she had no intention of limiting her photography to just one building. They arrived on a Friday evening. Jessica, her roommate Kayla, and 2 other students, Brandon and Ethan. The sprawling complex consisted of over a dozen buildings spread across 110 acres, connected by underground tunnels. Most structures were heavily damaged, their windows broken, walls covered in graffiti, floors rotted through. "This place is huge," Brandon said, setting up his tripod. "We could shoot here for weeks." They started in the administration building as promised, photographing the empty offices and waiting rooms. Old patient files littered the floors, the paper yellowed and brittle. Jessica picked one up and read a heartbreaking intake form. A 6-year-old boy committed in 1962 for mental deficiency, which turned out to be nothing more than a speech delay. "They locked up children for the smallest reasons,"
Everything is
Kayla
fine
said,
here.
flipping
There's
through more
nothing
files.
to worry about.
"Kids who just needed help were treated like criminals." As darkness fell, Jessica made her proposal. "The real shots are in the residential buildings. The dormitories, the hospital ward. That's where the patients actually lived. That's where the story is." Ethan hesitated. "We promised to stay in this building. We're photographers," Jessica countered. "We document truth. The truth is in those other buildings." Against their better judgment, they agreed. Using a map Jessica had researched, they made their way to Mayflower Hall, one of the largest residential buildings. The path took them past overgrown gardens and rusted playground equipment, sad reminders of the children who had lived here. Mayflower Hall was 3 stories of brutalist architecture, its concrete facade crumbling, windows like empty eye sockets. They entered through a side door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the dormitory was even worse than they'd imagined. Large rooms with 20 or 30 beds bolted to the floors, so close together the patients could barely move between them. The bathrooms were communal, with no stalls or privacy. Restrained chairs sat in corners, leather straps hanging loose, stained with substances they didn't want to identify. Jessica photographed everything, her camera flash illuminating scenes of institutional horror. In one room, they found children's drawings still taped to the walls, crayon pictures of houses and families and sunshine, dreams of the normal life these children would never have.
Help! Somebody help!
This is so sad, Kayla whispered. These were just kids. They were on the 2nd floor, in what appeared to be a medical examination room, when they heard it. Children laughing. The sound echoed through the building, coming from somewhere above them. There's someone else here, Brandon said. Trespassers, probably. But the laughter didn't sound like trespassers. It sounded wrong, too high-pitched, too uniform, like multiple children laughing in perfect synchronization.
They always can come back.
Jessica, always the curious one, headed for the stairs to the 3rd floor. Let's see who's up there. The 3rd floor was worse than the others. This is where the most severe cases had been kept, patients who were considered dangerous or uncontrollable. The rooms here had padded walls, some still covered in torn, yellowed padding.
Let's see what we have
Scratches
here.
marked the walls where
Wait, what's that in
patients
the
had
back?
clawed at them.
I got it's moving!
And the doors had been reinforced with metal, with small viewing windows and feeding slots like prison cells.
No, the whole layer is gone. I
I
have to start over.
Floor. Now there was only silence, broken by the sound of their footsteps and the wind whistling through broken windows. They moved down the hallway, checking rooms, Jessica photographing the horror of each one. Then they reached a room at the end of the hall, different from the others. The door was newer, reinforced with modern locks. And on it, someone had spray painted in red, "Do not enter tunnel access." The underground tunnels, Ethan said. They connect all the buildings. That's probably how maintenance moved between them in winter. Jessica's eyes lit up. Think of the photos. The tunnels must be untouched, preserved exactly as they were left. No way, Brandon said firmly. Tunnels are too dangerous. They could collapse, we could get lost. This is where we draw the line. But Jessica was already trying the door. It was locked, but the wood around the hinges was rotted. With Brandon's reluctant help, they forced it open. Behind the door was a staircase descending into darkness, the air rising from below cold and damp. They could hear water dripping somewhere far below. Just 15 minutes, Jessica promised. We'll go down, I'll get some shots, we'll come right back up. They descended into the tunnel system, their flashlights revealing a network of concrete corridors that stretched beneath the entire complex. Water leaked from cracks in the ceiling, forming puddles on the floor. Old pipes ran along the walls, some broken and hanging loose. The tunnels were a maze, branching off in multiple directions, with no clear markings. Jessica was in heaven, photographing everything, the decay, the graffiti, the old equipment abandoned in corners. The others were less enthusiastic, increasingly nervous about being underground with no clear sense of direction. They'd been exploring for about 20 minutes when they realized they were lost. The tunnels all looked identical, and they'd taken so many turns that none of them could remember the way back to the staircase. This is bad, Kayla said, trying to keep panic out of her voice. We need to find the way out. They tried retracing their steps, but every corridor looked the same. And then they started noticing something disturbing. As they walked, they kept seeing the same graffiti repeated. He's coming, hide, don't let him find you. Who's coming? Ethan asked, though he didn't really want an answer. That's when they heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete, echoing through the tunnels. Coming toward them. Hello? Brandon called out. We're lost. Can you help us? The footsteps stopped. Then, after a moment of silence, they started again. faster now. Running toward them. They ran in the opposite direction, splashing through puddles, their flashlights bouncing wildly. Behind them, the footsteps kept pace, never quite catching up but never falling behind. And mixed with the footsteps was a new sound, a metallic dragging, like chains or keys scraping against the tunnel walls. They turned a corner and found themselves in a wider section of tunnel, where the ceiling opened up into a large circular room. Old hospital beds lined the walls, rusted and broken. And in the center of the room stood a figure. He was massive, at least 6.5 feet tall, wearing what looked like an old orderly's uniform. His face was in shadow, but they could see his eyes reflecting their flashlight beams, pale and milky, like a dead fish. "You're not supposed to be here," the figure said, his voice deep and slow. "Patients need to return to their rooms." "We're not patients," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "We're just leaving. We'll go right now." The figure tilted his head, considering. "Everyone says that. But the doctors say you need treatment. It's for your own good." He started walking toward them, and they saw what was making the dragging sound. He carried a large ring of keys attached to his belt by a long chain, and in his other hand, he held something that glinted in the flashlight beam, a syringe, large and old-fashioned. "Time for your medicine," he said. They scattered, running in different directions. Jessica and Kayla went left, Brandon and Ethan went right. The figure stood in the center, turning slowly, as if deciding who to follow. Then he chose. He went after the girls. Jessica and Kayla ran through the tunnels blindly, taking turns at random, trying to lose their pursuer. But no matter where they went, they could hear him behind them, those heavy footsteps and that dragging chain, getting closer. They burst through a doorway and found themselves in another stairwell, this one leading up. They took the stairs 2 at a time, emerging in a different building, the medical center, judging by the equipment visible in the moonlight through broken windows. They stopped to catch their breath, listening. The footsteps had stopped. Maybe they'd lost him. But then they heard something worse. Children laughing again. That same synchronized laughter, echoing through the building. And it was all around them, coming from every direction. Small figures appeared in doorways and at the ends of hallways. Children in hospital gowns, their faces pale and expressionless. There were dozens of them, all standing perfectly still, all watching Jessica and Kayla with empty eyes. "Please," Kayla whispered. "We're sorry. We shouldn't have come here. Please let us go." One child stepped forward, a little girl no more than 8 years old. When she spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless. "You wanted to see where we lived. You wanted to take pictures of our suffering. Now you can stay with us forever." The children began to advance, moving in perfect unison, backing Jessica and Kayla toward a corner. Then they heard new voices, Brandon and Ethan, shouting from somewhere below. "Jessica! Kayla! Where are you?" Jessica found her voice. "Up here! Medical building! Help!" The sound of running footsteps, and then Brandon and Ethan burst through the doorway. When they appeared, the children vanished. Simply disappeared, as if they'd never been there. "We found an exit," Brandon gasped. "Come on!" They ran together, following Brandon through a series of corridors until they reached a door leading outside. They burst out into the night air, into the overgrown courtyard between buildings. But they weren't safe yet. Behind them, more figures were emerging from the buildings, patients in gowns, orderlies in uniforms, nurses in old-fashioned caps. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all converging on the courtyard. And at the center of them all stood the massive orderly, his pale eyes fixed on the group. "Run to the fence!" Jessica shouted. They sprinted across the courtyard toward the perimeter fence, the spectral crowd flowing after them like a tide. They reached the fence and started climbing, the metal cutting into their hands. Behind them, the ghosts were close, reaching out with translucent hands. Kayla was the last one over. As she dropped to the other side, a ghostly hand grabbed her ankle. She screamed, kicking frantically, and suddenly the hand released. She fell to the ground outside the fence, safe. They looked back at the compound. The ghost stood at the fence line, unable or unwilling to cross. The orderly stood at the front, still holding his syringe. "You can leave," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "But you'll be back. They always come back." The group didn't wait to hear more. They ran to Jessica's car and drove away, leaving their equipment behind. The photos Jessica had taken showed nothing unusual, just empty buildings and decay. But in the background of a few shots, barely visible, were figures that hadn't been there when she took the pictures. Children in gowns. Orderlies in uniforms. All watching the camera. Jessica never finished her photo essay. She changed her major to graphic design, anything that didn't require visiting abandoned places. The four of them tried to stay in touch, but it was difficult. The nightmares made it hard to talk about what they'd experienced. And sometimes, late at night, they still hear it. Children laughing in perfect synchronization. The dragging of chains in the darkness. A deep voice saying, "Time for your medicine." Penn has closed in 1987, but for those who visit, who trespass into those dark buildings seeking thrills or photos, it never really closed at all. The patients are still there, still trapped in their eternal nightmare. And they're always looking for company. Story 3, The Pripyat Amusement Park. Our final story takes us to Ukraine, to the abandoned city of Pripyat, evacuated in 1986 after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. In 2017, a documentary filmmaker named Anton Volkov, along with his camera operator Dmitry and sound engineer Natasha, received special permission to film in the exclusion zone for a documentary about the disaster's aftermath. Pripyat had become a ghost town frozen in time. The entire city had been evacuated in just 3 hours, with residents told they'd return in a few days. They never did. Everything was left behind: homes, schools, hospitals, and most hauntingly, the amusement park that had been set to open just days after the disaster. The park had never officially operated. The grand opening was scheduled for May 1, 1986, but the reactor exploded on April 26. The ride sat unused, the bumper cars never driven, the Ferris wheel never given passengers. It became one of the most iconic symbols of the disaster, a monument to joy that never happened. Anton's team arrived in late October, when the days were short and the abandoned city felt even more desolate. Their guide, Yuri, was an older man who had worked at the power plant before the disaster. He knew the city intimately, knew which buildings were safe and which ones were too contaminated to enter. "The amusement park is relatively safe," Yuri explained as they walked through the overgrown streets. "Background radiation is not too high. But you must not touch anything, and we stay only 1 hour, yes?" They agreed. The park came into view as they rounded a corner, the iconic yellow Ferris wheel rising above the bare trees, the bumper car pavilion with its distinctive roof, the carousel with its painted horses now rusted and still. Anton set up his shots carefully, filming the decay, the way nature had reclaimed this place meant for children. Dmitry captured the eerie silence, broken only by wind and the occasional creak of metal. Natasha monitored sound levels, her equipment picking up the ambient noise of abandonment. "I want to film inside the bumper car building," Anton said. "Get some shots of the cars themselves." Yuri checked his dosimeter. 10 minutes only. Radiation is higher inside buildings. The bumper car pavilion was a large, open structure with a rusted metal roof. The cars themselves sat scattered across the floor, some overturned, all covered in decades of rust and debris. The overhead electrical grid that once powered them hung in tangled loops. Anton walked among the cars, filming each one. These were meant for children, painted in bright colors that had faded to ghostly pastels. Some still had names painted on them. Lightning, thunder, comet. That's when Dmitry noticed something odd. "Anton, one of the cars, it moved. Probably just shifting from the floor rotting out," Anton replied, focused on his shot. "No, look," Dmitry pointed. One of the bumper cars, a blue one with a white star painted on the hood, had definitely moved. It was now several feet from where it had been when they entered. Yuri's expression darkened. "We should leave," Now. But before they could move, they heard it. The sound of electricity crackling. Impossible, because the power had been cut to the entire city decades ago. Yet the overhead grid began to glow with a faint blue light. And then the bumper cars started to move. Not all of them at first. Just a few, rolling across the floor on their own, their wheels squeaking after 30 years of disuse. Then more joined, until all 20 cars were moving, circling the room in an organized pattern, as if invisible children were driving them. "This is not possible," Natasha whispered, her sound equipment going haywire with electromagnetic interference. The blue car, the one they'd noticed first, broke from the pattern and headed straight for Anton. He dove out of the way as it smashed into the wall behind him with tremendous force. Then it backed up and came at him again. "Out!" Yuri screamed. "Get out now!" They ran for the exit as the bumper cars went berserk, smashing into walls and each other with violent force. One car hit Dimitri's leg as he ran, sending him sprawling. Anton and Natasha grabbed him, dragging him toward the door as cars pursued them. They made it outside just as the pavilion's roof began to collapse, the decades-old structure finally giving way. The sound of cars crashing and metal tearing filled the air. "What the hell was that?" Dimitri gasped, clutching his injured leg. Yuri's face was grim. "The children. They still come to play." "What children?" Anton demanded. "The city was evacuated. Everyone got out." Yuri shook his head slowly. "Not everyone. When the evacuation happened, it was chaos. Some children wandered off, got separated from parents in the panic. By the time they were found," he trailed off. "The radiation doses they received. They died within days. Some here in the city, before they could be taken to hospitals." "You're saying ghosts did that?" Natasha asked incredulously. "I'm saying this place is not just abandoned," Yuri replied. "It's cursed. The radiation, it changed things. Made the veil between worlds thin. And those children, they died never getting to ride those rides, never getting to play in the park that was promised to them. So they play now, in their own way." Anton wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but he'd seen the cars move with his own eyes. The camera footage would prove it. "We should go back to the checkpoint," Yuri insisted. "We've been here too long." But Anton wasn't ready to give up. "The Ferris wheel. I need shots of the Ferris wheel." Despite Yuri's protests, they approached the iconic yellow wheel. Up close, it was both beautiful and sad, a monument to dreams unrealized. The passenger cars swung gently in the wind, their paint peeling, their windows broken. 5 minutes, Yuri said. "Then we leave, whether you have your shots or not." Anton set up his camera, framing the wheel against the darkening sky. Dimitri, despite his injured leg, prepared for a tracking shot. Natasha monitored audio, though she kept glancing nervously at the bumper car building. That's when Dimitri noticed something in his viewfinder. "There's someone in one of the cars. On the Ferris wheel." Anton looked up. In one of the passenger cars, about halfway up the wheel, was a small figure. A child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes from the 1980s. "Hello?" Anton called out. "Are you okay up there?" The child didn't respond. Just sat there, perfectly still, staring down at them. "That's impossible," Yuri said, his voice shaking. "No one can be up there. The wheel hasn't moved in 30 years. But as they watched, the Ferris wheel began to turn. Slowly at first, the metal groaning after decades of stillness, then picking up speed. The child's car descended as another rose, and they saw there was a child in that one too. And the next. And the next. Every car on the Ferris wheel contained a child. All of them silent. All of them staring. The wheel turned faster, impossibly fast, the cars swinging wildly. And then the children began to scream. Not cries of fear or pain, but laughter. Joyous, innocent laughter, the sound of children finally getting to ride the attraction that had been denied to them for 30 years. But underneath the laughter was something else. A Geiger counter sound, that distinctive clicking that indicates radiation. It grew louder and louder, matching the speed of the wheel. Yuri's dosimeter began to shriek. Radiation spike! Very dangerous! We must go now! They ran, no longer caring about equipment or shots. Behind them, the Ferris wheel spun impossibly fast, the laughter of dead children mixing with the clicking of radiation warnings. Other rides began to activate. The carousel started spinning, music playing from speakers that hadn't worked in decades. The swing ride began to rotate, its chains flying out with phantom riders. The entire amusement park had come to life. They ran through the streets of Pripyat, past abandoned apartments and schools, past the rusted playground equipment, and overgrown gardens. Behind them, the sounds of the park continued, music, laughter, the mechanical sounds of rides operating at full capacity. They didn't stop running until they reached the checkpoint at the edge of the exclusion zone. The guard there looked alarmed at their panic state, and Yuri's dosimeter was still screaming. You're hot, the guard said, checking them with his own equipment. Very contaminated. You'll need full decontamination. They were rushed through emergency protocols, their clothes confiscated, forced to shower repeatedly. The radiation levels were dangerously high, far higher than they should have been from just visiting the park. When Anton finally reviewed his footage, hoping to prove what they'd seen, he found nothing. The moment the bumper cars started moving, the cameras had died, overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference. The only evidence they had were their own memories and the radiation burns that appeared on their skin in the following days. Anton, Dmitri, and Natasha all spent time in hospitals, treated for acute radiation exposure. The doses they received should have required hours of contact with radioactive materials, not a brief visit to a relatively safe zone. Yuri disappeared. His family said he never came home from that trip. Search teams went looking for him, but found nothing. Some say he went back to the park, drawn by guilt over the children who died there. Others say he never left at all, that the park claimed him as it had claimed the children. The documentary was never completed. The film that survived showed only the approach to the park, before everything went wrong. But in the background of some shots, if you look carefully, you can see them. Children's faces in the windows of the Ferris wheel cars. Small figures standing near the bumper car pavilion. All watching the camera with hollow eyes. Pripyat remains abandoned, frozen in time, a monument to the disaster that changed the world. The exclusion zone is now a tourist destination, with guided tours showing the decay and desolation. But guides won't take visitors to the amusement park after dark. And on certain nights, residents of nearby towns report hearing music and laughter coming from the exclusion zone. The sounds of children finally getting to enjoy the park that was built for them. A park that opened 30 years too late, for an audience that no longer needs tickets or safety harnesses. Because the children of Pripyat are still there, still playing, still riding the rides that were meant to bring them joy. And they're always happy to welcome visitors who stay too long after dark. Conclusion. 3 abandoned places. 3 groups of people who thought they were exploring empty buildings. But they learned that abandoned doesn't mean empty. These places still hold the echoes of those who lived and died there, trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Before you explore that abandoned hospital, that closed asylum, that empty town, remember these stories. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some places want to stay forgotten. And some places are just waiting for someone to wander in, so they won't have to be alone anymore. Thank you for joining me for these 3 creepy true abandoned places horror stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, not all who wander are lost. But some should be.